Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Today we're doing a video on Idoneth allies for the Lumineth Realm Lords. For this video, I asked for some backup from Ryan, who's an Idoneth expert in my eyes, and we also have some free time to discuss the viewer questions that were asked in the Discord channel. Ryan, welcome, and thank you for making some time to do this video with me.
Of course, glad to be back.
Yeah, always great. At this point, I think I'm not calling you guest anymore, but just co-host.
I'll take it. I would love to keep showing up.
All right, great. So for this video, I figured we'd just cover the allies rules first, so the general rules and also what that means for the Lumineth specifically. Then we'll talk some topics, and topics is maybe a bit of a misnomer here because we're also going to cover some of the less optimal picks, I'm guessing. Then we're moving on to viewer questions. I made two lists, one tournament list and one list that I really enjoyed playing in a couple of games ago. And then we'll form a conclusion on the allies in the video overall. So let's start with the ally rules. So Ryan, feel free to chip in if you want to share anything. So for the general rules, for those who don't know, 1 in 4 units can be allies in any force. And when you include allies in your list, you basically ignore them when you're determining what your main faction is. Allies can never be the general nor fill the battle line roles, but they can be included in core battalions. In a 2000 point game in match play, 400 points of those 2000 points can be allies. So those are the general rules. Do you want to add anything to that, Ryan? Because you're a bit of an ally... How should I put this? Not an expert, maybe, but maybe like a connoisseur.
Yeah, I've been kind of obsessed with allies since the beginning, especially considering in cities you can use so many coalition options as well, which of course is something different. But one other thing that I think is important to keep in mind here is that allied units you choose, like heroes, for example, can't take any version of enhancements. So it might be tempting to say take a Lord Relictor in the most order armies because he's a priest with a +1 to pray, or chant, but he can't actually take curse or any other universal spell. So that applies here as well. No artifacts, no other enhancements. Clearly, like you said, can't be the general. There are, of course, even though with Lumineth, you've got the the one restriction or the one potential ally in Idoneth. It's good to remember we also have Bundo Whalebiter available to us and Gotrek Gurnison. So even though we're not going to be covering them, we could probably talk about them really quickly at the end if we like, just to make it as thorough as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I didn't really include it in this video, but maybe I should have. We can definitely cover them in the viewers' question section because there's also some more general questions about allies as a whole.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Lumineth specifically, so Idoneth are our only allies, well, excluding Gotrek and Bundo, obviously. But what is interesting is that some of our allies, well, all of our allies, gain 2 Lumineth Realm Lords allegiance traits that are not keyword binded, which I find very interesting. So they do gain Aether Quartz reserves and lightning reactions. So for example, if you were to include an Eidolon of the Storm, he would gain an Aether Quartz and he would benefit from the lightning reactions, which means you could activate him as a second activation in per one of your opponents.
Now, are we sure about that? Because I thought allies didn't use any of the battle traits whatsoever.
Yeah, well, see, so that's what my thinking was as well. But when I looked it up on the internet, there was this huge consensus that basically there's that this is the case. So I went looking in the rules that would contradict this, and there's really nothing in the rules that contradicts this. So that's interesting, right? Yeah.
So if that's true, I think that has really widespread implications across the whole game, and I just haven't ever seen anyone actually rule it that way. So I think it might be good at least to leave this as if this is the case, kind of like we did with the FAQ during Idoneth. Because I don't know, I'm a little hesitant to say that a TO will ever let that actually exist. But yeah, maybe I'd have to look into what the rules, kind of the minutia of the rules say to kind of get there. But I would lean towards don't assume you have it, and if you do, then just be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I talked this over with a friend of mine who was also surprised by it and maybe a bit caught off guard because it seems so contradictory to the ally system as a whole. For me personally, obviously, I like it. I don't really find having 8 accords on your allies is very flavorful, so I don't necessarily use that, but I do find that having them in lightning reactions just kind of makes sense to me, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a bit weird. I do agree there. I think the only way that it kind of makes up for me is that we only have Idoneth, so I feel like we will take any bonus that we can get. Why do we not have more allies is a mystery to me.
Right, especially why you don't have Stormcast.
Yeah.
Something else I forgot to mention too that's a subtle rule, but this is how people play it, is that even though allies and coalition units don't count as battle line for fulfilling that responsibility, if they have the battle line keyword, or whatever, battlefield role, they can be double reinforced. So you can bring, for example, if I was in another army, let's say cities, and the only place you could take Lumineth in cities is in Settlers Gain. But let's say I did. If I had a not Dawn Riders, Wardens unit, and then I brought a big unit of Sentinels, I could actually double reinforce that unit because it now technically counts as battle line. It just doesn't fulfill my battle line role. So you can, in fact, double reinforce things. It's not going to apply here today, but it is another technicality that people often miss.
And how does that interact with Broken Ranks, for example?
I'm pretty sure Broken Ranks is battle line in your starting army, and I want to say that means like your army, not allies, but I could totally be wrong about that. And we don't talk about these rules, these interactions very often, because I don't think people are bringing a whole lot of allies units enough for GW to trigger their FAQ,
Yeah, because I was scouring the standard rules, the GHB rules, and the FAQs, and literally on the ally system, I think it's, as a whole, there's maybe spent 7 sentences on it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ridiculous to me because it really needs a lot of clarification.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we should almost, just the two of us, get together and try to find every spot that has any kind of reference to what it means to actually get the battle traits in your army too. I have a feeling it's not just in the allies-oriented sections. It might be, it has to have the keyword, or who knows? I don't know. Yeah. That's my gut intuition.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the top picks. So I divided these picks into 2 categories, the heroes and the troops. I briefly considered ranking them, but that seemed a bit, I don't know, I don't really believe in the whole tier list thing because it's so personal anyway. So we'll just cover them alphabetically, and you can give your opinion on how effective they are. But there are some really good picks and some less optimal picks in these sections. So let's start off with the heroes, and then the first one that comes up on the app is the Achillean King. So originally I hadn't even included him in this one because he is a beatstick, but still his main focus or his biggest strength comes from interaction with the Idoneth rules, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And also, it's not just the interaction with the Idoneth rules, but giving him Arcane Tome to get Flaming Weapon, giving him the command trait Unstoppable Fury, giving him the mount trait Void Chill Darkness. So at the end of the day, a good chunk of what beefs this guy up is the extras you take that definitely come from the Idoneth Battle Tome. Even if, and we'll talk more about this later, even if the tides can be pulled in, there's an FAQ needed on this via allied units. The rest of the stuff is still necessary to make this guy the version that everyone's kind of like a fanboy of at this point.
Yeah. I mean, about the tides thing. When I read the rules yesterday, the rule specifically says he gains that tide benefits
Yeah.
aside from the normal tides that you would gain otherwise. So I feel like the tide might still trigger. Wow, it's early for me. Might still trigger. So I kind of feel okay about it. But even if it doesn't trigger, I still think his damage is quite okay. And he's in that same points differential or points brackets with Eltharion. And I feel he kind of fulfills the same role, right? They have almost the same wounds. But this guy is much faster, which is a huge problem for Eltharion. Neither of them have a ward save, but this guy is a bit more reliable in my opinion. Have you checked out the Eltharion War Scroll when you were looking for allies when you played Settlers Gain?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean he's got such a long War Scroll for how small a dude he is. Obviously, the ethereal part of Eltharion, he's got an ethereal save, right?
Yeah.
That save is much better than what the King's got going. He's only 7 wounds and a 3-up save. Volturnos, which we haven't mentioned, I think, on these slides, but Volturnos, arguably, might be a better choice outside of, especially if the tides thing doesn't work. Outside of Idoneth, because he's got a 3-up spell ignore, which is definitely going to help keep him alive from mortal wounds a bit. And something that's also cool to think about when you're thinking about allies is we have this sub-faction locked keyword thing that's going on that GW loves to do so much these days, where oftentimes the main sub-faction, like the capital city, ends up being the one that all the heroes are tied to.
Yeah.
Volturnos is tied to Iron Rock as well. And what this means is that's actually a negative thing, right? Because you can only use him. He only gets the allegiance abilities in Iron Rock. But if it's an Idoneth army. But if you take him as an ally, well, it's not an issue no matter at all. You are already losing it anyway.
Yeah.
So I always think that that's kind of a decent trade-off. Also keeping in mind that unique characters can't take artifacts and command traits anyway. So that, kind of downside is also diminished here, because that's true of even your generic characters, which sometimes, honestly, I think, there's sometimes only like a 20-point difference between a generic character and its unique version. And I think part of what that points difference being so small is all about is that generic character still gets to take a command trait possibly, and definitely an artifact if they want to, which can really beef them up, whereas the other one's not modular at all. So I kind of think Volturnos might be a little underrated here. Not that you've ranked these at all, like you said, but the King, remember, isn't getting all of the super benefits that he normally would get outside with his polearm, which is what you usually take him with. And Volturnos' expected value, his expected damage, is actually higher with the Astra Solus, his main weapon, and their mounts are exactly the same.
But he's also quite a bit more expensive, right?
Yeah, I get. But I mean, at this point, you're kind of, if you're taking allies in Lumineth, which is, as you've pointed out multiple times before, kind of a points-hungry army, you're probably doing something for the lols at the end of the day. So I could see an argument for putting Volturnos at least just to keep him alive a little bit longer. But yeah. So
honestly, there is maybe 2 or 3 units in this presentation where I honestly believe that they are a great addition to the Lumineth roster. That might even be competitive. I don't think the Killing King is that unit, just to be clear. But he's a cool choice, and I think he'll fulfill a role that Lumineth has a hard time fulfilling, and that's fast, reliable damage. So I mean, and with reliable, I don't mean the mortal wounds output, because that's obviously what Lumineth are very good at. But you can point this guy in a direction and just let him go, and he requires no backup. While with Lumineth, you're so dependent on your spells going off, on combining them. This guy can just do his thing, right?
Yeah, let's take a look at the wording of because we're going to need to reference this later, perhaps in talking about other characters. But let's look at this Tides interaction thing real quick. I'm going to read it out loud so everyone can hear. So the Lord of Tides ability is what we're talking about. It's a once per battle ability. that happens at the end of your charge phase, where you can pick up to D3 different friendly Idoneth Deacon units wholly within 12 inches of any friendly units with this ability. Thus far, we're okay. He can obviously pick himself, and then if you can squeeze in some extra points, then you could maybe target another unit. Mm-hmm. If you do so, until the end of that turn, the units you picked are affected by the High Tide ability from the Tides of Death table, in addition to any other abilities from the Tides of Death table they are affected by. Now, clearly, they're not affected by anything else.
No.
Now, this is the real kind of FAQ quandary that I'm finding myself in, is that usually when we think of allies, they are War Scroll. They basically exist in a universe unto themselves on their War Scroll. They don't interact with the lore in a book, for example. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in Sylvaneth, Verdant Blessing is a spell that all Sylvaneth wizards know, and even the GW app has put Verdant Blessing on every single spellcaster as though they actually get it all the time.
Yep.
But it's not actually on their War Scroll. Yep. So, in the same way, the reason I'm hesitant to say that this definitely works is because there's some kind of like catch-22 cyclical thinking thing that kind of goes on here, where you're saying, well, that is a battle trait. Can you pull a battle trait in from the War Scroll itself? And I typically think that they're going to rule no on that. But if they did, and you could take another unit, you could get him plus another unit fighting first, which of course would be great, and that's a big way to keep this guy alive. Yeah. And then in which he has to do. He's the save and wounds characteristic aren't high enough that you're going to just throw this guy in like Eltharion and hope he survives. Arguing against my argument for Volturnos, playing devil's advocate for a second, is instead of that ability, Volturnos has the thing where he can, during High Tide, give 3 units plus 1 attack. But that's different, right? Because you can't. It's not actually a High Tide outside of what am I trying to say? Idoneth. So that ability totally wouldn't work in this army unless maybe the King's does. But then they together cost more than 200 points or 400 points, so you can't take both of them. So it's a null. If you're just looking for the hitting. The only thing Volturnos is worse about is he's not -3 on the charge. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He's got more attacks. He's got the same profile otherwise. He's got 3 damage by default, and he's got the spell ignore. So there's a part of me that thinks, especially if that Tide bit falls off and definitely is ruled as not being existent, that Volturnos might be a better pick. How many more points is he? Let's see, 290 versus...
250.
Yeah, so you're paying 40
points.
Spell ignore.
Which is big in a Lumineth Force, because there's no game where I ever went, oh, I have 40 points left. Never. Right. So I don't know. If the Lord of Tide does fall off, then I do agree that Volturnos would be a better pick. At this point, I'm not trying to abuse this rule here. I even think if the Lord of Tides is still in effect, it's still not a good way to spend 250 points in a Lumineth roster. So apart from that, I still think that it is rules as written right now. I think it does work, but then there is the question that you pose, like, rules as intended, is this intended?
Yeah, it's also maybe just to be a little bit persnickety with the wording, but on the slides it might be good to point out the Lord of Tides is not bringing in the ritual, but the Tide ability itself, because the ritual is the other thing.
True, yeah.
So, and that can sometimes get easily confused in the book itself, so it's just good to keep that in mind.
Yeah, okay, thanks for pointing it out. Okay, so the next one you might include if you're bringing a lot of allies, because on its own it's quite useless. So it's the Achillean Thrall Master. In our Idoneth video, you were a huge fan of this guy.
Yes, with the Namarti.
With the Namarti, yeah. So if you're adding onto into your list like 20 more Namarti Thralls, for example, that would cost you 260 points on top of the 110. You could squeeze in those 20 plus this guy, and you would have a fairly killy ally detachment, right?
Yes, in this. Yeah, not only killy, but modular, and perhaps even protected, right? Because he's got that. He can do the -1 to wound rolls against your Namarti guys and himself, so they can be kind of protected as well. Especially, and I think it's worth pointing out again that I did in the last video we talked. Teclis's protection of Teclis is protecting all friendly units. So anything we're putting in this list is getting tankier if you take him in that build. Of course, he eats a lot of points, but it's just worth pointing out that if you were to take 370 points worth of 20 thralls and a thrall master, not only could they be -1 to wound if you need them to be, but also be sitting on a 5-up save, which is equivalent to their boat save that they have from their own battle time. So one other thing that's worth pointing out before we go into more detail about this that we kind of glossed over earlier is the 1 in 4 drops rule for allies and coalition units.
Oh yeah.
So the thing is, and they word it oddly, that in a way that makes it so that you kind of have to rules lawyer it sometimes. But the 1 in 4, you might be inclined to think that it means 3 out of 4 of your units have to be from your own army, and usually that's the case. But in this particular situation, it does hold. But it's worth pointing out that in, say, an army that has coalition, if it says 1 in 4 can be coalition and 1 in 4 can still be allies, that means that only a half of your units actually have to be your army. Yeah. So it can get kind of finicky that way. But in this particular case, so let's say we took a thrall master and one big block of 20 thralls. So that's 2 units. That's 2, and then multiply that by 4 gives us 8 total units, or multiply it by 3 to give you how many Lumineth units you're going to need. So you're going to need 6 other units. Question for you: do you feel like you're running at least 8 units in every game that you're playing?
Usually 7 or 8. Yeah.
Yeah, so that can be a tricky thing, especially with my next suggestion, which I actually think is a stronger suggestion, but probably difficult to pull off in Lumineth, which is doing Thrallmaster plus 2 single tins of Thralls, which bumps the drops up to 3, which means you're going to have 12 total units or 9 units of Lumineth. I'm assuming you're going to tell me that 9 units, 9 units plus 3 allied units is almost never going to happen.
I don't think so, yeah.
I can imagine a build maybe if you wanted to go with a Stone Guard, like a Metrica build, because they're the cheapest unit, right? And you could take a Stone Mage and a bunch of small MSU versions of them. I could maybe see that build being a thing and just have this really tanky kind of list, but I think that's kind of a niche-y thing. So most likely the most amount of units we're going to be able to squeeze in here drops-wise is 2.
Yeah, I think if you're including this guy, it's probably going to be with 20 thralls in a big block, because otherwise you're going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard to squeeze them in and have enough Lumineth units to compensate. Yeah. Okay, so...
Fortunately, those thralls have a 2-inch range, so that shouldn't be too much.
Yeah. So the next one is actually one that I really like, and it's funny because when you're looking at this guy from an Idoneth perspective, you're thinking, well, this guy got hit by the nerf hammer, but this guy is exactly what the Lumineth don't have in their roster. So I have played this unit in a Lumineth game, and I had so much success with him. It was really good. I loved how reliable he was and how little support he needed to do what he has to do. So for 355 points, he is quite expensive. He's the same price as a Mountain Spirit for the Lumineth. I would argue if you're just bringing a Mountain Spirit out of your Metrica for the damage, definitely bring this guy over the Mountain Spirit for sure. Because his damage is firstly much more reliable. Secondly, he has more attack, so you can spread them more easily. He has bonuses against heroes, and he has a 5-up ward save built in, which is huge, because in Lumineth, outside of Teclis, it is really difficult to find ward saves. Sure.
Yeah, you were saying that this guy, got the nerf hammer. I would totally agree. His +1 to wound bubble that is separate from the +1 to hit, by the way. But his +1 to wound bubble that excludes mounts is now much smaller than it used to be. But if you're not bringing any other Idoneth units, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't affect his mount, but his mount is not the good part. Anyway. Although weight of dice, if you need weight of dice attacks, you can get max 12. But something else that's good about him is he's a totem. So if you need to throw him upfield, he can still throw command abilities, or you can be using him as your. Let's say your general gets killed, and then you're rolling a 2-up for your heroic action to get a CP on this guy because he's a hero. Mm-hmm. He can broadcast for 18 inches. And I don't know if Lumineth has any more totems. Maybe the banner, right?
Yeah.
The banner might be. But that's always kind of a nice little just silver lining to one of these guys, too. And he heals. I don't know if you mentioned that. It doesn't look like it. But he heals on the charge. So and can retrieve and charge, which is really flexible for board control.
Yeah. That's why he fills a role that Lumineth don't have, because we don't have any beatstick heroes. Sure, you could argue Eltharion and even Avalenor, but they need so much support. Like Eltharion is pretty good, but he's slow, he has no ward save, and his 3-up unrendable save is nice. But in the game as it is right now, I've never really felt like he earned back his points, for me personally at least. Now with this guy, what I loved about using him was that when you rush him up the board, he's quite fast, he doesn't need any spell assistance whatsoever, and your opponent kind of has to deal with it. While your slower stuff can move up the board, you can support him with sentinel shooting, and the fact that he's a hero also kind of functions well when you're running, for example, mountain spirits or wind spirits, because they can't issue commands to themselves.
Right, so there's that totem thing.
Yeah. Exactly. I ran this guy in a kind of a meme list. I called it the 4 elements Avatar has awakened list, because I played him as my water element, mountain spirit as my stone element, Avalenor as my fire element, because my Avalenor is built out of the Avatar of Cain from the Eldar range. And then Severeth as a wind element. Nice. It was so much fun, Ryan. And it did well. It has some play. You're basically dealing with 4 big threats. 2 of them are right up in your grill from the get-go, while the cows moving from behind or moving from the second rank. Yeah, I really liked him.
Yeah, that sounds fun. The other thing that a lot of people associate with this, especially back in the Broken Realms era, was that you could take an Arcane Tome with him. So it's just, I always find with allies, it's really important to point out the things that kind of the normal build that people bring with these things, and that just to realize, hey, you're not going to get the full normal build. So he's not going to be able to put Flaming Weapon on that, Arcane Tome Flaming Weapon on that, what's it called? Spear of Repressed Fury to make it extra beat stick.
Yeah, when you're including allies, you kind of have to look at the price points for each unit and remember that you're paying extra for rules you're not getting.
Right.
And on this guy, I specifically liked having the Aether Cores, because being able to add +1 to your save on this guy plus all-out defense is amazing.
Right.
So if that does end up being an option, then I honestly think he's a great pick.
Yeah, and you could throw a Mystic Shield on him with all of your mini spellcasters if you really wanted. Send him upfield, and then he's not going to die.
Exactly. Yeah, he's super tanky, and damagey as well. Like, I really enjoyed his reliable damage, especially when you're targeting heroes, for example, with less than 9 wounds, so 8 or less wounds. You're getting +1 to hit and +1 to wound against them.
Right.
Yeah. Not that Lumineth usually have trouble dealing with low wounds hero models, but hey. Well, talking about Eidolons, I also included Eidolon of the Sea here, and I remember in our chat about Idoneth, I was a huge fan of this guy. I still am in the Idoneth roster. But for Lumineth specifically, I don't really see as much value for him as I would in Idoneth. And that's because, first of all, we don't lack spells or good casters. That's not something we lack. So having another 2 spell caster in our list is not a huge deal, I would say. Also, he can't take any other spells. He has 2 spells of his own, but one spell is like 50% useless because you can only use the heal on Idoneth units, and otherwise you're just doing D3 mortal wounds, which is fine but not fantastic. The main reason why you're taking this guy is a Tsunami of Terror, right? Which has been confirmed in the FAQ that it stacks on a single unit. So basically, you could cast it on a unit within 12 inches, 7+. I think this guy can reroll all his casting rolls, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And you roll a d3 when your cast goes off, and you can choose that many units to subtract 1 from their save. And you could, per FAQ, you could still choose the same unit more than once. So potentially you could subtract 3 from an enemy's save.
Yeah, so the subtracting from the save, a big part of that is if you're a weight of dice army. So my thought is with him, there are 2 builds that kind of come to mind. I agree that if you're taking a spellcaster heavy build, probably don't need him so much. But perhaps in a build, again, if you went Emetrica, which their heroes aren't, except for the Stone Mage, aren't really big wizards, and he's not a big one anyway. Mm-hmm. If you're running with something like that, I could see this guy offering some amount of utility. Yeah. But and remember, he's also a totem, so you can issue to either the 2 big aspect characters, so in the Wind Spirit or the Mountain Spirit, mm-hmm. that aren't the generic ones that aren't heroes. But that's the other list, is the Huracan list, and you think about the Huracan shooter guys. Isn't there a spell in Lumineth that makes the shoot, like you can double shots or shoot twice or something like that? And I'm thinking about Wind Chargers instead of Sentinels. Sentinels would help too. Like, I know we're usually fishing for 6s, but if you can pick a target and then make its rend go to 0, then it doesn't matter what the rend is on it. We use this trick in Cities of Sigmar, both Anvil Guard and Harkaran, which Vitriolic Spray, which removes the save off of a target. Yeah. It's also worth pointing out, though, that even if it did remove the save, you can still use all-out defense and make it 1 better, because a save of nothing makes something equivalent to 7, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So this ruling is a little bit more clear. But anyway, I guess I could see some utility. It definitely is a better spellcaster in Idoneth, especially with the command trait that lets you keep casting more spells every time you roll an unmodified 7 or higher. It's also been FAQ'd to be a totem as well. It used to not be. So it can also fill that role that we were talking about with the Storm. But I think I agree with you. The Storm is probably better for more Lumineth lists than this one is.
Yeah, so just to clarify something, so there is no spell that lets us double shoot, luckily, because I think that would break the game. There is a spell that can increase the range of your shots by either increase the range of your shots by 6 inches or add +1 to your hit rolls for those shots. But there is no way to increase the amount of shots in Lumineth right now.
Yeah, I was thinking, what's the Huracan ability though? Isn't there some way to make the Wind Chargers do more?
Oh, yeah. When it's not an Huracanum thing, but it is a Helen thing. So that's a Great Nation, and all shots within 3 inches gain an extra shot. All missile weapons.
Okay. That might have been what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
In either case.
Yeah. So if you're, for example, on Unleash Hell or just in combat overall, you'll get an extra shot. Yeah. Nice. I do agree with you that this guy is probably best used in a non-Venari kind of build, because the Venari really depend on their mortal wounds, so you're ignoring saves anyway. And it's not to say that Sentinels couldn't benefit from ignoring saves, obviously, or having a lower or having to shoot at a lower save unit. But if you just think about the price tag that you pay for Sentinels for their mortal wounds shots, you usually don't want to spend them on something that has no save. You want to bypass a save with your mortal wounds.
Yeah. Remember, ally wizards can cast endless spells. So if you brought cogs in your list, you could make him use the cogs, and of course that could also speed up your army if you need it. But with his rerolling casting rolls, and he heals if he does do that, I could see him as a good target for being able to use that extra cast. So I don't know. I don't think having only 2 spells on his scroll, which is pretty good. A lot of times 2 casters don't have 2 spells on their scroll. And of course he can do the generic spells like Metamorphosis, make himself a monster. We don't have Steed of Tides though, of course, which is the teleport spell in Idoneth, and that's the other thing that's usually paired with this guy.
Yeah, because 12 inch on his spells is quite short range. But yeah, he's, you know, apart from the spell casting, his damage is still quite alright, I would say. And as you mentioned, the endless spells, maybe Cogs is not that big for Lumineth anymore, but Livestorm definitely is.
Sure.
And having that reliably cast, because you can get a reroll with this guy, is quite handy, especially because he'll have to be close range anyway, so he's probably following your troops that need it most anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely more useful in Geometrica or Helon builds, maybe even like Wind Temple builds, because they suffer from not having mortal wounds and not having any high rend, except for the cows, obviously. But this guy combined with Avalenor's -1 rends, they will wreck face. But then you're sinking in 700 points into one combo.
Right. He does have a shooting attack too, which kind of fits with the Halon vibe. The Huracan.
Yeah. All right. So we're moving on to the Isharan characters now, and I don't think you would have included this guy in the top picks list, would you?
I do think being able to deep strike with this guy and bringing 2 other units with you could be interesting, but that only leaves 250 points, which is not enough to bring 2 blocks of thralls, which would be my first pick. Like a big block of 20. So the problem is you're not really bringing a whole lot. You could bring a shark. Remember, he can only deep strike with Idoneth units. You could bring another hero. You could bring a king if you really want. That would be exactly 400 points. But the other thing is, remember, when you're paying for an Isharan unit now, you're paying for that ritual ability, which you definitely don't get anymore.
Yeah.
Because that's listed in the battle traits, not on the war scrolls. And then the other thing about this guy, of course, he's a priest, but like I said before, and you guys don't have a priest in your army, but priest allies cannot take prayer scriptures. So, and he doesn't have one on his war scroll, which means you're losing everything that he gets for being a priest, other than the unbinds, I guess. He can dispel spells or whatever. So, but you don't really need that in your army. So if you can find another unit worth bringing along with him, then, you know, I'd say maybe it's worth it. He's a little tankier than he used to be. He's got a 5-up ward now, 4-up save. But I don't know. I think it really depends on what you can bring with you. If you had unlimited points and you could bring like a turtle with you or something, that would be amazing. You know, that'd be really cool. But
that would be epic.
As we know, turtle is now over the 400 point limit. It used to be 380, and you used to be able to bring it, and now not anymore.
And it used to be quite a good ally as well. And I still think it would be decent, but 500 points is, you know, even if we were allowed to bring it, I don't think you would have 500 points spare and still be an optimized list.
Well, you could always do 2,500 point games if you want. So
yeah. So, you know, I include this guy specifically just for the battle tactic maneuver, because when you're playing, for example, Sylvaneth, and you have your teleporting tree revenants for the easy battle tactic, what's it called? Savage Spearhead. That's quite nice. And in certain Lumineth lists, you kind of want to how should I put this? You kind of want to take away the pressure from your castle, because you usually end up castling with the Lumineth. And the enemy has an easier time to take control of the board. And with this guy, even if you're just bringing 10 thralls, for example, you are still giving your opponent more targets on a completely different point of the map. And they should probably be dealing with him, right? Because they can still threaten objectives and whatnot.
Yeah, now that I think about it, you could bring him, the Soul Scryer, a Thrall Master, and 1 block of 10 Thralls. And the Thralls would be hitting for a good bit harder when they get in.
Oh yeah, that would just fit, yeah.
Yeah, it would be within 400 points. Yeah. So maybe that could be something. I don't know if it's worth eating up 400 points of your list.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Savage Spearhead's great, but there are ways to block him out. Remember, this guy has to come in within 6 inches of the table edge, and then the units he brings with him can be further outside of that. They have to be within a certain block from him, but still 9 inches away from the enemy units. So, and you have to bring them in by the end of turn 3, right? So. Yeah. If you're castling too, you might not be able to.
Yeah. I was just thinking like Morsar Guard. Bring them in from the edge, then your opponent's looking at 14-inch movement unit that he has to deal with, because they're gonna get into his low wound heroes or taking objectives or whatnot. So I think there might be some play, but honestly, if you're looking at that price point, as you say, you're almost spending 400 points on a gimmick that's not gonna pay it back for itself, right? Definitely not. So yeah, there is that to consider. Let's move on. So I skipped all the other heroes because we will go over all the other heroes in the last slide from the topic section. But all the other heroes kinda are only good in Idoneth, I feel. They don't really add anything to Lumineth. Maybe you could shed some light on certain other units later on, but for now I think we could move on to troops, unless you want to add something to the hero section.
Sure. Keep going.
Okay, so the troops, honestly, I include everything, because I feel like with the new Idoneth book, all your troops are kind of good. The Thrall specifically, I could see being used in any Lumineth force as a screen, because they are only 10 points cheaper than Stone Guard, and I think, I don't even think there's an argument to say that Stone Guard are better.
Cheaper or more, 10 points cheaper or more expensive? More expensive, right?
Yeah. Stone Guard are 120. Yeah. So you get 10 more bodies with the Thralls, you get much more reliable damage. Your opponent kind of still has to fear what can come out of 10 Thralls, even if it's not a huge lot. I just keep thinking back about my game with Nick, where I charged in 5 Stone Guard into 10 Crypt Ghouls, and I lost that fight.
Yeah.
And I was like, if that had been 10 Thralls, those ghouls would have been dead twice over.
Yeah, especially if they got to attack first. Because the Thralls are glass cannony. They don't have a good save. And remember, they're not getting any 5-up awards from the boats or whatever, high tide rule. They hit really hard and are super flexible. They're either doing weight of dice against small units or doing like good damage against bigger units. And by bigger units, I just mean 3 wounds of 3 or more, like you have on the slide. I think for their points, they're fantastic. And remember, with the Thrall Master, they're re-rolling 1s or doing exploding hits. Yeah, you can't really argue with this unit, especially now that it has 2-inch range. So with a block of 10, every single one of them is attacking. So yeah, it's a good unit.
Yeah, and if you're running Ymetrica, Stone Guard might still be better because they're ignoring -1 and -2 rend now. But other than that, I still think that every time I've used my Stone Guard as a screen, they died anyway. So whether they have a 4+ save and ignoring -1 rend, or they're just 10 bodies with a 5-up save, which the Thralls are, I think.
Yeah.
It's the same. I just want a screen. These guys can, make a larger screen, first of all, and they can kind of threaten other screens, at least.
Yeah, back in second edition when I started playing Idoneth and then was looking into allies that Idoneth could take, I was using the thralls because I just started playing the game. I was using the thralls as my baseline for what an infantry unit should be, and then like looking through the cities units and being like, none of these are better. None of them are better than and it wasn't just per point. It was just none of them are doing this amount of damage, and that was before the thralls had a 2-inch range. So yeah, I would definitely say that this unit is undervalued and has been even for a long time. So, and especially considering we're talking about bodies, I think I brought up a point about the same thing about swapping them for the Stone Guard, if that was possible. Because if that's all you're doing is a screen and some bodies, they're pretty good at doing it.
Yeah. Have you noticed, Ryan, on this model specifically, how large his left hand is?
Oh, wow.
Like that hand is bigger than his head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those elves, they live under the sea and stuff. These are kind of mutants, really, little freaks. And these guys don't have eyes either.
No, exactly. So, but you know what they say about guys with big hands, right? so these Idoneth trolls.
Yeah, they're good at sticking it to them. So.
Yeah. That's maybe where the 2-inch reach comes from.
Oh man, these guys. Yeah. Well, and you got to keep in mind they're down under the water with no sense. It's kind of like a sensory deprivation thing. I bet there's other things you got to do to take pass the time. So. Yeah. And maybe that fish has something to do with it too.
Oof. I would not want to have that fish have anything to do with that, though. Anyway, moving on to the other Namarti unit, that's a Reaver. So this unit is a bit of a conundrum for me in Lumineth because they are competing with Sentinels for the same, because they have the exactly same price. Yeah. So it's 170 for 10 models. I still think they're a decent ranged unit. Hitting on 3s, winning on 3s, -1 rend to 1 damage is okay. 2 shots, which is nice. And you get +1 to hit when they target a unit within 9 inches. Does it happen often for you, that last bit?
Yeah, and remember, because it's on their War Scroll, it negates the Unleash Hell minus. So they're back to the normal profile on Unleash Hell, which is nice.
Yeah.
For 170, this is definitely worth it in Idoneth, but that's because you compare it with, they're getting the wards. You compare it with the Thrallmaster. The Soul Render can bring them back. And the Turtle gives them +1 to hit at times, which can even make it on Unleash Hell a 2+. The Turtle gives them +1 save, plus all the Tide stuff. So I feel like the 170 for them is especially coming from the Allegiance abilities. But, because they used to be way cheaper. They actually used to be our cheapest battle line at 115 and had more shots, which is leading me to my second point, which is they used to be especially a weight of dice unit, where they didn't have any rend, and you were just a unit of 30 of them was throwing 90 shots in a general direction if you were close up within 9 inches.
Yeah.
Now that's been nerfed a bit, but the total output comes out to more anyway, especially with the rend. And they're actually viable within 18 inches. But again, like you said, versus the Sentinels, it's hard to argue for these guys, I think. But they are a cool unit, and they're fast. They move 8 inches. So if you wanted to skirmish with something and send them up, that could be a thing I could see going on to protect the castle. Yeah,
exactly. So the argument that was made in the Discord was that these guys are better at killing screens than Sentinels are, because you don't want to waste your high-value mortal wound shots from Sentinels on a screen.
Yeah,
I can see that. I can see that point, but if you just think about if you're bringing Sentinels, you're at least bringing 20, at least, probably even 30. So you're looking at just a unit shy of 500 points, and then you're adding on top at least 20 in the Namarti, I'm guessing, to fill your allies with. That's a lot of points in units that don't really impact the game any further than range damage, right? And if you're killing screens, I'm guessing you have something to charge with, right? Because otherwise you don't care about the screens.
Sure. Yeah. An interesting like mirror match almost kind of thing here is that Idoneth, one of the big problems for Lumineth against Idoneth is going to be that their screens are the ones you have to shoot. So in a weird way, if you could have something that removes the thralls from the front, your sentinels are going to actually be able to shoot what they want to shoot now because of the Forgotten Nightmares rule. So I could see that. That's more of a niche case, or against. I think we're heading into a horde meta, right? With the new announcement of what GHB is going to be about. So there might be a lot more bodies you're worried about, and maybe the value of sentinels will only be for targeting heroes, and they're not going to reasonably be able to take out full horde units.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Every time I tried fitting in these guys, I could not help but think that I would want to spend those 170 points on something that with more value, because I can see them being really good in Idoneth. They also pair very well with the Eidolon of the Sea spell, I think. But you can't include both of them as allies. So if you could have, that would have been great. But as of right now, I would rather take the Thralls and add Sentinels than take Reavers and add Wardens, for example.
Yeah, I think Thralls are because they're a better hammer unit than you usually have anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this unit is one of the 3 units that I really see being a good addition to Lumineth, because the Allopax is what Lumineth wished they had, and I think we will have at some point. It is a fast unit that hits hard, needs little backup, and is good in any phase, except for the magic phase, of course. They only cost 165, so you could bring 2. They have quite a strong ranged attack, or you could even bring a net launcher, which you can talk about later because you are really enthusiastic about that one. And they're pretty good in combat as well. So having 1 or even 2 of these guys in your force, threatening your enemy's flanks while your wardens are moving up the middle, is really strong, I think.
Yeah, I think this might be low-key the best choice.
Yeah.
Because of what it can do. And I would take it in 2s every single time. Blow a reinforcement point, because not only are you getting a second unit that has 3-inch coherency, right? Like a second model. But, so you can, if you're worried about the shots, they can both receive all-out attack. But it gives you a champion to this unit. And when it goes upfield, it's going to be outside of your bubbles. And by having a champion, it can actually use command abilities. So you might want that on this unit moving up the field. The other thing that's cool about this, there's a lot of things that are cool. Keeping in mind, this is a mobile artillery unit that doesn't have the artillery word, right? It just happens to have the best attack profile of any mobile artillery unit that I'm aware of. It's melee attack profile, especially if the unit is wounded, which of course as a shooting unit itself or with your sentinels is very easy to guarantee that unit's wounded when it gets there. Or it's on a big enough base. If you got 2 of these, you can use it as a screen, and it's not a bad screen either. My big argument for the net launcher is, especially if you're building a castle build, think about a big block of wardens with their 3-inch range. If you can make it so that unit can't pile in, the unit that's coming into your castle, all of your wardens still get to attack, but none of theirs are. Yeah. Like they'll get 1 model in, or however many in, and you can keep moving around to avoid them hitting as much as possible. If you can just tag them on the side, that's one of those tricks that we use with the eels sometimes, is you just tag them on an edge, and then hit them with the pile-in, so they're just stuck with like Ishling Guard, the ones that are unrendable. But similar kind of thing here. I feel like there's a very, very strong defensive build, and especially considering you don't really need the harpoon shots the way, I know you have an argument for it, but you don't, with such good sentinel fire, you don't need the harpoon shots in the same way that Idoneth does. Idoneth has no other like long range, kind of damagey, snipey. shooting, but you have plenty. And so I feel like that net launcher actually keeps you alive more than the damage that the harpoons will end up doing ultimately.
Yeah, and you could even argue that the net launcher is also good if you're not playing the castle build, but playing the Alumnia Warden build. I'm not sure whether you've seen the video where it was a tournament list where someone brought 60 Wardens.
I don't think I saw that one yet.
Yeah, so just imagine a unit of 20 Wardens out of Shining Company, so they can charging into a unit that has been hit with the net launcher. You're just tagging maybe even 5 models or something to get all of your attacks in, and they can only attack with 5 back.
Right.
That is so strong. Yeah.
Yeah. And now the thing is, it's not like this Living City deep strike shoot move that the fulminators do. It's not just having to have shot, it has to have hit. But that's still better than than having to wound or kill a model or whatever. So the net launchers do have to score a hit, and they each only have 1 attack. So that's
4+, right?
A 3+.
Okay.
So that's my reason for saying taking 2 ensures that it happens, or better. It better ensures it, and especially if you take 2, they can both receive all out attack if you want, and then you're kind of if you really need to guarantee it. Plus the 2. Those guys hit really hard. I mean, like in melee, and you throw those guys up, they will definitely break down those screens that you were talking about earlier, or be that unit that you need after removing some screens to charge in and hold them up, keep them away from your castle, so you can, hold more board control and make the better use of them. These guys are super fast at 14 inches.
Yeah, and it's as you say, if you're looking at the Reavers, for example, to kill screens, these guys are 5 points cheaper than 10 Reavers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're better at killing screens than they are. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true, just of course not from afar.
No, yeah. I mean, they might be if you not bring the net launcher, of course, but that's a discussion on how you want to use these guys. But yeah, I think this one is probably the top pick with the Eidolon of the Storm and the Thralls coming in close, in a close second and third.
Yeah, that's fair. What's your big argument for the harpoon?
The thing is, for example, when I play one of my wind spirits, I find having that extra shot on top of my sentinel fire is very useful, because I almost never play 30 sentinels. And you kind of feel the lack of having those 10 extra shots to get 2 or 3 extra mortal wounds in, right? So having that extra shot from a Wind Spirit or an Alopex would come in handy for sure.
How would this guy play in a Fox build? Like, do you need the like, let's say, net launcher to take down or to keep the pylons from happening when you can just retreat out of combat anyway? Probably not, right?
No, because what the foxes what is good about the foxes is when they charge in, they reduce your pile-in moves from 3 to 1 inch anyway.
Okay.
And then they can pile into anywhere on the field 6 inches if they made a charge.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I just thinking about the mobility. They go along very well with the mobility of a Halon list. But I don't know if you need it. It might be overkill at that point. In that case, I would take the harpoons.
Yeah, it would be totally badass though to play 15 wind chargers, add some foxes and alopexes, and have nothing that doesn't have the fly possibility on their scroll.
100%.
Yeah,
yes.
That would be super cool. Yeah, I agree. The only thing is that these guys could not look less Lumineth-y.
Right. You can paint him white, a great white, I guess that wouldn't be white, but like a beluga color or something.
Yeah. But you could have the Eidolon look still a bit like a Lumineth character that has gone to the sea, but these guys are very, very Idoneth-y, which I love, by the way. I think these are really good. Now, moving on to some other choices, we're looking at the 2 eel choices now. So the first ones are the Morsar Guard. You used to see both eel choices a lot in 2nd edition. They have fallen off, I think, at the end a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, because Morrsar Guard's price went up and Ishling didn't. And, in the current meta, the Morrsar just weren't pulling their weight. But, yeah. Now they're the same price. So it's kind of back to where it used to be, where if you're going to take eels, you could go either way.
Yeah, and the Morrsar Guard are also a thing that Lumineth don't have is cavalry that hits hard, which is probably weird to hear, because I would argue that the Dawn Riders are better armed and better defended than the Morrsar look on the pictures right now. But apparently, if you're riding an eel on magical waves, you just do more damage with your spears, right?
Well, they've got the biovoltaic stuff, so that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But don't Dawn Riders actually do a good bit of damage if you get all the right situations lined up? Like they're against infantry units of wounds of 1, and like they're not mounted or whatever. Aren't there a bunch of things that can make them actually hit pretty hard?
Yeah, if you're hitting 1 wound models without a mount, you're having 3 attacks on each Dawn Rider, so that's 15 attacks hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s on the charge. 6s are mortals, or even 5s with Power of Hish, which is cool. I don't argue. I don't argue about that. The thing is, how often does that happen?
Well, again, horde meta. I really think we're headed into infantry land.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And well, on that note, that makes a block of 6 Morrsar Guard a little bit more useful than the block of 6 currently is, because with the biovoltaic thing, they get the extra bonus to doing more mortal wounds for the once per game ability if the unit they're targeting is bigger than this unit.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, there are plenty of units that are 5 or less, and so if you're going in with 6, you're not going to get that bonus. But if you go in a horde meta with a block of 6 of these guys, which you can afford within 400 points, then maybe that's a good way to jump in there, tie up some lines. They get +1 to charge as well, super fast. You can blow those mortal wounds right off the bat if you want. I think there's some viability here, though. I tend to lean towards the Ishling Guard just because I like them being used as an anvil. But we can talk about that when we get to them.
Yeah, I like the Morrsar Guard. I wouldn't say they're a very good pick in a Lumineth Force, because I originally hadn't even included them here. Because if you compare them with an Alopex, for example, the Alopex is 30 points cheaper, which you will need in a Lumineth Force anyway, those 30 points. And they kind of do the same thing.
Right.
If you're using these guys in Idoneth, it's a different story, obviously, with backup from a king or something. But if you're just looking at what we can bring, if you're either bringing 2 Alopexes and some more Lumineth, or 6 of these guys, I would probably go with the 2 Alopexes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the other ones are the Ishling Guard. Oh, I didn't change the picture here. That's too bad. The Ishling Guard. So these are the tanky ones, and you were a big fan of these as a screen, right?
Yeah. So if you take a block of 2 of them, they're what did I say? Putting them up with Techless. Putting them in the front, 6 of these models are definitely going to act as a screen. They've got an unrendable save that's a 3-up on the charge, like you've got on the slide here. They don't hit particularly poorly for what they do. And if Techless got protection and Techless up, they'd be sitting on a 4-up unrendable save and a 5-up ward, which means they're not going anywhere anytime soon. At 4 wounds per model, that would be 24 wounds for that big block of 6, and they're fast. If you need to go send them somewhere to go take an objective or whatever, although they only count as 1 model on objective or 1 body per model, it's still, I think there's a lot of flexibility here. Again, it's leaning into defensive, and you were talking about using thralls. This is the true anvil of the army. Thralls are not an anvil at all, but like they are better bodies per point.
Yeah.
But these bases are big enough. Of course, if you have 6, you're going to have to worry about the coherency issue. But you can figure that out. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. And on the slide, I see that it's written fact, but that obviously has to be fast, and they have a large footprint.
Yeah.
I would even argue that you might even run 2 units of these as 2 units of 3.
Sure.
which could be useful as well if you're running, for example, if you would be able to do so, combining these with some cows is actually quite good because the cows need some time to get there.
Yeah.
These guys will tie up some of your opponent's units while the cows get into position. So that would be able to work, yeah.
Sure, and also tankier, -1 to wound still? Is that how that works? Or you have a -1 to hit bubble?
Yeah,
That's what it is.
yeah. Avalainer has a -1 to hit bubble, and the normal cow has a -1 to hit targetable ability on 1 unit within 12 inches. Yeah. All right, so I think if I remember correctly, yep, that's all the top picks. So these are the ones that didn't make the cuts.
Yeah.
I don't know where...
I'll go through them real quick.
Okay. Yeah.
Elethane's just in his group is just the Underworld's Warband, not worth talking about. The Soul Render would be good with Nomardi if you want to bring them back, especially if you've got a Life Swarm and just want to go nuts on that. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry about him. He does have a potential of once per game ability to kill a hero, but he's going to have to be in combat to do that. So
yeah, Elethane has that ability as well, by the way, which I think is really strong. But Elethane is 250 points.
Yeah, he's the same thing. Yeah, he's as the Soul Render, but I mean, he's coming with 4 extra bodies, including the cool crab.
Yeah,
but they don't do anything. Okay, the Tidecaster. The main reason you're taking a Tidecaster in Idoneth is to get 2 rituals, but you don't have access to rituals, and you can't reverse the tides, so forget about it. Lotan, Broton does not do everything you need him to do the way he normally does, because he's adding +1 to wound rolls for Idoneth units, which is still great. That's still good to pair with some thralls, actually. Can you afford him? Yeah, you can afford him in a block of 20. I actually think that might be still an option. Getting them up to 2s onto wound, but maybe not. Maybe that's too much. And then his once per battle ability is letting you use a ritual that you don't currently have access to. Again, that would be FAQ'd if you were going to use that. But I think the +1 wound might be worth it. And then I talked about Volturnos already. I actually think Volturnos could be a thing, but yeah, that covers all those units, and then the Leviathan just isn't within the points.
Yeah.
But honestly, would be a great option, especially if you could take some Nomardi to use that ability too. But obviously, it's not on the table.
Yeah, so that was a viewer question actually. What monsters that would fit the Lumineth, but there's only one, and it is too expensive to include.
Well, you got Bundo, so
yeah.
That's an option, and of course, if you take either Bundo or Gotrek, then you can't take any other allies, even if they were under the points limit. But yeah, I mean, Bundo might be worth it especially if you can protect him with Teclis. But they remember the Giants don't count for 35 wounds or whatever it is that they count for in Suns. They're counting as 5, so on objectives. So. Yeah, there's that problem, but he could be cool. I could see that being a thing. And the other thing that's worth pointing out, there is one extra ally that you don't have access to that every other army does. Can you think of what it is?
No.
It's a trick question because you do have access to it, but not in the way that I mean, is Alanya and Elithor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's every other army that's along with Bundo and Gotrek, except Alanya and Elithor don't eat up all of your ally points, I don't think. So
well, they're 285, so close.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, Alanya and Elithor, I really love the twins. I just wish they were 30 points cheaper, and then I would probably include them in 50% of my lists.
Yeah. They're an interesting unit.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're moving on to some viewer questions, and most of these will be answered by you, I think, Ryan, because they get very specific at times about the Idoneth and not about the ally system per se. It's a bit 50-50. So the first one is, what is the best standalone war scroll in the Idoneth Deep King roster, in your opinion?
For the Idoneth rules or as an ally?
Well, let's do both.
Well, the ally thing, like I just said, I think the Sharks bring a lot of versatility. So I'm gonna say the Sharks. But in IDK itself, I have a really hard time arguing with Lotan being in every.
I knew it.
I've said it since the beginning, and it's proven that even with the FAQ, it's still the unit. So Lotan is my favorite, but he's clearly not the one that's the linchpin of everything. He's just kind of making everything better. To this day, I've played Idoneth 7 times, played against Idoneth 7 times. I haven't beaten them a single time, and in the current version of it, Lotan is definitely a superstar. I just went to a tournament in Germany, and I played against the Nautilus meme list, which was Eidolon of the Sea, Lotan, and then 3 turtles.
Jesus.
That was the whole list. And this was me playing 8 fulminators. I thought I had him because I was going to be able to deep strike and just hit the turtles whenever I wanted. He beat me. I went 9-11 on him with the points differential system, so it was almost a tie. But that was a really fun game. Super cool guy. Shout out to Johannes if he ends up listening to this for some reason. But anyway, Lotan's great. I can't say too much about him, especially if you need to get that ritual and you don't have any other Isharan in there. Mm-hmm. He's the cheapest one.
Yeah. Okay, so sharks as allies and Lotan in Idoneth themselves. Yeah. Okay, cool. I would agree with that. What bring IDK to the table that Lumineth Realm Lords don't already have? I think this will be a question that we will have to answer together, I think.
Sure.
Do you want me to go first, or do you? I'm actually curious what you think they bring that Lumineth don't have.
Well, to be fair, we've just gone through a lot of stuff, so I've learned a lot from hearing you talk about it. But it's clearly some amount of mobility, some amount of hitting hard, of course, even if it's with a glass cannon unit, this idea that you can have tankiness too, which like you've got a lot of glass cannon stuff, but with our eels, the sharks are actually decently tanky, all things considered. There's some defensive things that we can do that maybe you guys don't have as easy access to without Shining Company or using Ether Quartz or castling up. I think Idoneth is a little tankier without the castle, without the buff pieces.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Speed for sure. Even though you could argue that Lumineth is very fast at some certain points. But what I like about the Idoneth as allies for Lumineth is that they have fast choices that don't need backup. And that last bit is huge for me. Because when I play Lumineth, I am constantly measuring auras all the bloody time. 12 inches, 18 inches, 9 inches, all the time. It is, right. Just yesterday when I played a Unimetrica game against a friend of mine, we played one game on Tabletop Simulator and one game in real life yesterday, and I get so tired from playing physically and much less tired from playing Tabletop Simulator because I could just show all the auras on the screen. Yeah. Right. And I feel like I play better because I don't fuck up my game plans accidentally by piling in 1 inch outside of my aura and fucking up all the entire strategy. Yeah. I like that about IDK, that you don't really have to bother about keeping them within auras.
Well, in IDK itself, you do end up playing with a lot of levels. Yeah. I think in this situation, you're picking units that are free to go do their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, next question. Are IDK allies actually worth bringing? Well, this is obviously... I think we have answered this question a bit now, but what do you think?
I think it depends. As someone who loves the ally option for a lot of armies, especially coalition options, I'm a huge fan of trying to make something work that's outside of your book, especially if a book feels limited. Obviously, Lumineth right now has plenty of units. Maybe you don't feel like all of them are viable and it feels kind of like only a couple builds are worth doing, but at least you have more units than some other armies. Yeah. But being able to bring in extra stuff is always cool, and it's always been a Johnny type personality trait fulfilling thing that for me, that you're trying to find this niche-y kind of combo that could be really cool. And like you said, you had a blast playing with the Eidolon of the Storm. So yeah, worth is not just in a competitive sense, right? It's also like, does it keep you in love with the game, right?
Yeah.
And does it make for more enjoyable interactions? Like when I played Teclis in that Settlers Gain list, that was literally my favorite army I've ever played.
Which is arguably more important than it being worth it in a competitive sense.
100%.
Yeah.
Because it makes me want to keep experimenting with things and keep trying new fun lists, you know. So I think it's totally worth trying. Maybe don't bring it to a tournament until you've seen some kind of track record, but we don't only play tournaments, you know. I would say only about a third of my games are tournament games. So I think allies in general are worth bringing. I think Idoneth brings a strong selection of individual units that really could add something.
Yeah, I agree here completely, and I think my opinion will a bit flow into a question that's going to be asked next. I think allies are worth it. You know, IDK or not IDK allies are worth it if you take them in a competitive sense. If you take them to improve something and not just because you want to fill your ally points. So if you're really looking at, I want to make IDK work as an ally, I think you might be walking into a trap almost, because you're going to try to force a strategy into a book that's not fit for that strategy. But if you're looking at, for example, the Stone Guard and Namarti Thralls comparison, that's just an easy swap, right? And they do the same thing, but just one is just better in most situations.
Yeah, and just a quick call back to your last video with Lawrence. He went third place at this tournament using a Star Drake that he admitted multiple times in the video or in the recording that was only taken because he really wanted to, right? And I do think sometimes that you can still do well taking a thing, even if you, all right, maybe it's not a direct swap or you're losing some battle traits or whatever, but I don't know. I definitely think that there could be secret sauce in there that's worth looking into.
Yeah, and if you really love a unit and you play it often, and it is a unit that is not picked often in the competitive sense, you can't underestimate the advantage that you're gaining from that, right? Look at your friend Nick, for example, with his Flesh Eater Courts list. Like, no one at the tournament knew what was going to happen.
Well, by the way, there's been an update since the last time we all talked about it, is that all the summoning he can do, it turns out if he's standing next to the Charnel Throne, all of his heroes, they can blow it for no CP at all and bring in the whole 800 points worth of summoning at the same time, which he wasn't using in the tournament. So now he can have 2,800 points worth of guys on the board from the beginning.
Jeez.
Which is insane. Yeah, that probably won't last whatever new battle tome they get. But since Death doesn't have a battle tome for the rest of the year, he's got a while to keep playing with it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, that's something to look forward to.
Yeah. You sure you want that rematch?
Yeah. Slanesh is also just crying in a corner right now. Yeah. So the next question I found very interesting, and I feel like I could do an entire separate video on this. How do the Idoneth Deepkin picks compare to their Lumineth Realmlord equals? For example, when you're comparing Eltharion versus the King, or Eltharion versus the Storm, or the Kawa versus the Storm. I think this question is really interesting, but maybe a bit too big to answer fully here. But do you have a short answer, Ryan?
Well, considering I don't really play Lumineth, it's hard for me to answer the other half of the equation, but I think we've hit on a lot of these points in comparing the units we're bringing in.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's always a trade-off. So, I mean, we've got our Idoneth is very cavalry-based. So looking at our cavalry, you've already talked about that versus Dawn Riders. And Wind Chargers don't do the same role. We don't have a skirmish cav in Idoneth. You don't have an artillery piece that's a mobile artillery piece like the Sharks. We've talked about Eltharion and the Storm. I think the cows are cool, but I feel like you have to build around them, right, to make them really pop. Whereas the storm just kind of, and the king just kind of can do that whenever. So I guess in the long run, I would say that Idoneth, when you can compare them, I would say the Idoneth ones probably come out a little bit ahead, because the Lumineth ones are benefiting so much from all of your combined battle traits, whereas the Idoneth ones somehow manage to still be good outside of their own battle traits, and even better with them, of course.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. For some reason, okay, there we go. So now we're moving on to some questions that are not tied to the ally system anymore. I did include these because I didn't really see us making a new video in the future that would cover these questions, unless you're interested in making a video on how to beat Idoneth. But as you say, you've played 7 times against them and you've not won once. Is that what you said?
Yep, that's that's an embarrassing stat, but it is true.
I mean, it is the same for me, though. I only played against your Idoneth, so. Yeah. But yeah, also 100% loss rate. But this is a good question, because for us as Lumineth players, this is horrible. So for those that don't know, the Forgotten Nightmares ability forces you to shoot at the closest target, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Per model. So yeah, it can get a little finicky. Getting around it. And remember, in turn 1, they can make it so that it's only within 12 inches too, which is even worse. Yeah, getting around it is going to be having enough power to remove things, in before turn 3, right? Because turn 3 is when Idoneth really turns into Mega Mode. It's Super Saiyan or whatever. So, I honestly, I think the trick is having enough power projection to just remove all the stuff that's closest as fast as possible. And that's difficult to do. Either that, or you have to lock them down so they can't get to you. Now, obviously, once they do get close, you can shoot at them, but it's usually too late. And if they're good, they'll time it so that they get to fight first then. Yeah. And remember, the king can make D3 units fight first in turn 2, which, Idoneth can table you pretty easily now at this point. So I don't know. I think the trick is just having enough power projection or enough defensibility, one or the other, because getting past it, the shooting, honestly, it's just a really bad matchup. Honestly, the best way to get around it is to not have any shooting. Mm-hmm. Which is tough with an army that depends on sentinels, but
yeah. I mean, I've always heard that the Fox build is difficult to play against Idoneth, but I would argue that it's probably an easier time with the Fox build than Sentinels focused build, because at least the Foxes can get into position, right?
Yeah, you could get behind enemy lines.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. Okay. Should allies be more like a filler unit, or should you build your list around them? So this question, I feel like I have covered a little bit when we were answering the question whether IDK allies were worth it. What do you think?
It depends on the ally, so on the unit. So if you're building it around 4 Stormdrake Guard, which you can't here, but if you were, I think they're worth building around. If you're building it around Gotrek, worth building around. Like there are certain casters that can speed him up. Or bringing a Cogs, you can't teleport him, but there are certain units that are eating enough of your points that you probably should. But in this particular case, no. You guys don't have a single thing that you have access to other than maybe Gotrek that's worth building around.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have a way to speed Gotrek up other than Cogs. Do you? Do you have a way to give a friendly unit any extra speed, keeping in mind you can't teleport him?
Yeah, and speed of fish is only tied to Lumineth keywords, so I don't think so.
Yeah, so there's not much you could do other than taking Cogs. I would recommend if you want to do Gotrek. Yeah, so there's that. But no, generally speaking, I would say that your allies should be supporting what you're doing. So, like, you can't do this in Lumineth, but a lot of Order armies can take a Frostheart Phoenix, which is basically the cow, the fast cow. Yep. In this, it's got a -1 to wound bubble. And that's doing the other way around. That's supporting your army. You know, that's making your army tankier. And so that's the kind of thing. Or taking the Celestant Prime, not building around him. He's augmenting what you're doing in some of these other lists. So no, I would generally say it should be just as some icing on the cake that makes your army pop in a new way that you hadn't discovered before.
Yeah, I agree. Especially for Lumineth, at least.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're moving on to 2 army lists. So this one you will recognize, Ryan, because I only changed one thing, and it was a change that you suggested at the end of the tournament, I think. So this is the tournament list I ran, and the one that you faced at the first round of that tournament. And here I just replaced my 5 Stone Guard with 10 Thralls. They cost 10 points more, so it ends up being just 2,000 points on the nose, which is a bit of a pity, I guess, because I would lose the chance of having a triumph, but you know, it's not a huge deal. I think this list would have done slightly better, but almost worked in exactly the same way. So this was really an easy swap for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is I had kind of suggested this too, so I definitely agree with it. You know, again, this is just adding some salt to your list, you know, like to some seasoning, and it's giving you a little bit more functionality for what you were originally looking for, which was more bodies to be kind of a shield. So yeah, I would support this, and this is a good way to test out a unit. And also, if you're just trying to build, let's say you're going after a Idoneth army yourself, this is using allies is a fantastic way to slowly start painting that army and trying those units out and seeing how good the war scrolls are just on their own. So this is kind of a cool way to, you know, just sprinkle a little bit of that in too.
Yeah, I agree. I am very close to buying myself an Eidolon of the Storm, and I'm tempted to paint him in my color scheme, which I think would really fit his aesthetic with the white armor and the gold. But then I'm also thinking, what if I end up playing Idoneth for real, because the army is just so much fun and so gorgeous, and I just love everything that's elves. Do I really want to paint an entire Idoneth army in white and gold trims again? And the answer is a definite no. So yeah, but I agree, it's a great way to build up a different force.
Yeah, I thought about, when I was originally just an Idoneth player and was just expanding to allies, I thought about painting every single one of my allies in like Sea Elves colors, which would have been really cool. But then again, like you say, when you bring them to the table, then unless you want to keep going, or you just buy the units over again. To keep it, being fair, Slaves to Darkness has this issue, because in Slaves to Darkness, you can mark a good chunk of your units as one of the 4 Chaos Gods or Undivided, which means if you want to have every single option, you would need to buy your army 5 times over, which is insane. Mm-hmm. Or just not care about what you painted them and just say, okay, they're painted blue, but they're Khorne. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're just running one ally unit, it's cooler if it fits into your overall army aesthetic. But say you're running a small attachment like 20 Thralls with a hero, with a Thrall Master, for example, that would be cool just as a force that just came out of the sea and fights alongside of the Lumineth, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Not that I would be able to squeeze it into this list because I don't have enough units. But yeah, that's stack list for you. So the other list, I only added one ally unit as well. But I do think this list has some play, and it is based on the meme list that I played, the 4 elements list that I mentioned. It is in Alumnia this time. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Alumnia.
I've read all the rules, but I forget which one this is.
Yeah, so Alumnia gives 3 units a pre-game move.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and it can be elementary units, so temple units or Vanari units.
Nice.
And the cool thing is here, Ryan, is that you can choose the same unit more than once. So just imagine moving up your wardens your 20 block of wardens and your mountain spirits. Well, the mountain spirit either 12 inches or the wardens either 12 inches, and the other 6.
Nice.
And then having the 24 inches on Severeth and the 12 inches on Eidolon of the Storm.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
That is scary, right?
Yeah. Of course, it depends on what they are. If they're Iron Jaws, then you're just handing it to them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, that's very cool. And obviously, that would, in some sense, help you counteract the Forgotten Nightmares issue for those Sentinels, because you're going to get into combat faster, knock some of those things out, and then maybe start targeting the other things you want to be targeting.
Yeah. So I played almost this list with the meme list, and I just took out all the Venari stuff, and I put in Avalanor and 3 Stone Guard units with a Stone Mage.
Yeah.
And it functioned quite well. The only thing that I find annoying in this list, and I have the same problem here, is it doesn't fit in a battle regiment.
Sure.
And with Alumnia, you kind of want to have that option.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those tricks with this, is the Eidolon's not actually a behemoth, but because he's a commander style model, he's 10 wounds or more.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do with that. Yeah, I don't know if there's a good kind of fix for that. How many troops units you've got enough that if you took a troop instead, you could squeeze it into the battle regiment. Yeah, and of course, if the Spirit of the Mountain was a Valinor, you also couldn't, because then he'd be a commander himself, and then you would he wouldn't fit in the list.
Yeah,
right now,
I would have to drop Severeth to a normal Wind Spirit.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is not worth it in my opinion, but if you did, you could at least add in the Life Swarm, which would also be a good choice here, keeping your Wardens and your Sentinels alive for a longer time. But yeah, I haven't made a video about this specific list because I haven't played it enough to be able to say that it is really good, but I think it is a very fun list, and that I am already very sure of. So if any of the viewers play this kind of list, please let me know how it goes. And if you had the same experience that I did, that it was just great fun at least.
I bet no one's played this list. I'm just gonna throw it.
I agree. It is, it is very, very me, this list, because I always run 20 Wardens, always, and always run 20 Sentinels, at least when I try to play somewhat competitively. And then I just go from there, right? I just sprinkle in some stuff that I find cool or that I like at the moment.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the lists. So that brings us to almost the end of this video. So just to conclude, and maybe if you want to add something that we haven't been able to mention, I feel like the IDK allies feel too niches right now. The Normarti Thralls, for example, can be cheap screens with decent damage. We might even be able to add the Ishling Guard to this niche. And they are quite affordable, fast units that still hit hard. Think the Achillean King, think the Eidolon of the Storm. They fit into the ally slot, and they are scary, even if they are not as scary as they are in their own book. I do still think, though, that less is more in this case. Trying to squeeze in as much IDK units as possible might be the bad move here, from a competitive standpoint.
Yeah, there are some armies that really like maxing out their allies, because they can maybe give those allies extra things. Like Idoneth used to be able to, in Einrock, give the tides to their allies, which was super cool, including Gotrek, by the way. That's no longer there. And then the cities, of course, can take coalition units and give them the keywords, all the keywords. So in that sense, yes, it's and this kind of going back to that old question, the salting, which are you building around the allies or not? Sorry, I got a siren pass.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's definitely true in this particular situation. And what's kind of cool about you only having one ally's choice is that you get too overwhelmed with it. And if you really liked playing Idoneth, like I said, it would be a great way to just kind of start toying with that army and seeing what you like and what you don't like. But I do think it's kind of neat to sit here and think of these guys as just this little extra extension to your battle tome instead of having the million options. If you had Stormcast, this conversation would be way different. So
for sure.
And Stormcast is the second most likely thing for you to have, so it's weird that you don't. But
I mean, it is even more likely than Idoneth, if to be
Yes,
fair, Ryan,
more
because we basically try to kill all of them.
Well, yeah, but we can take you now too, which brings me to something else I wanted to say before the recording was done. Is I think we do have another video in us of taking the other way around. So taking
that'd be interesting.
Taking LUMINETH units as either coalition or allies in other armies. So I think that would be kind of fun, and I'd like to pick your brain about that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we could always make a video on how to beat or how to try to beat Idoneth.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know if that's. I can tell you what's going to happen. I can't tell you how you get around it so easily, I guess. But if I figure that out, we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, if I think back to my how to beat LUMINETH video that I made when I just started this channel, the main thing that you're sharing is the biggest threats, right? And how to deal with them, and just informing everyone on what they do. So I think that you could do, and that we could do, even if we've lost a lot against, even if we've lost a lot to Idoneth.
Right. Yeah, for
but
sure.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to add, Ryan, or can we round off the video here?
I think we're good. I think we're good.
So with that, I would like to thank everyone for watching, and especially thank Ryan for spending another 2 hours on this video, while we said that it would be much shorter this time around.
Oh well. We enjoy it so much.
Yes. If you also enjoyed it while watching or listening, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. It motivates me and Ryan to make more of these videos, even though we don't really need the motivation right now.
Right.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments what you liked about this video, what you learned maybe, and what you would like to see next. That can be either LUMINETH related stuff, or even just stuff that relate to Ryan's input, because I have noticed every time I make a video with Ryan, he's always very quick in answering questions.
Yeah, happy to get involved. I kind of live on YouTube as it is, so
yeah, same.
Keep them coming.
Yeah. Okay, so also if you want to continue the conversation or discussion, and if you want to have some input into the next video, please do consider joining Discord. The link is below. All of these viewer questions came from the Discord specifically, so stay in touch. Thank you everyone again, and see you next time. Cheers.